The movie kicks off with Teddy Miretto driving a stolen police car at breakneck speed along a busy Nevada highway. He appears visibly distressed and fearful, giving the impression that he's being pursued. Unfortunately, his escape is short-lived as the car breaks down in the middle of nowhere. Left with no choice, Teddy continues on foot near the Nevada border, carrying a suitcase filled with money and important documents he stole from his client. Meanwhile, near the Nevada border, two police officers engage in conversation. Valerie Young, a young policewoman, receives a gun as a gift from her boss, Coleman, and tests it out with skilled precision. Later, the officers receive intel about a disturbance at a wedding not far from the Nevada casino. They rushed straight to the scene. Upon arrival, the chaos was already in full swing. A brawl was underway in front of the building, and as Valerie stepped out of her car, she had to fire a warning shot into the air to quell the disturbance. Suddenly, Teddy, a business consultant who had earlier fled in a stolen police car that broke down near the Nevada border, attacked her from behind. Teddy struck Valerie from behind until she collapsed to the ground. Valerie's partner then aimed a gun at Teddy, who raised his hands in surrender. Shortly after, Valerie deployed a taser to incapacitate Teddy and successfully subdued him. Later, Valerie took him into custody at the police station on assault charges. During the arrest, Bob Vidic, a hired hitman, was spotted observing Teddy from a distance. He had been tasked with eliminating Teddy by one of his clients due to Teddy's theft of money and valuable documents. Teddy's decision to turn himself in at the police station is an attempt to safeguard himself from Bob's pursuit, which could lead to his death. Upon reaching the police station, Teddy underwent a search. The police discovered a significant amount of cash in his suitcase, along with various confiscated documents serving as evidence. Valerie notices a gunshot wound to Teddy's stomach during the search and inquires about what occurred. However, Teddy chooses to remain silent, opting not to disclose any information. Teddy was then thrown into a solitary prison cell located at the rear of the police station, separated from the other inmates. Meanwhile, in another room, Coleman, Valerie's superior, received a phone call reporting that his officers had been struck by a speeding car out of the blue. The vehicle was being driven by an extremely intoxicated individual. Eventually, Coleman's team brought the drunk driver to the police station and placed him in a cell alongside another intoxicated inmate. It turns out that the drunken individual is Bob, the assassin who is targeting Teddy with the intent to kill him. Bob purposely gets himself intoxicated and collides with the police to be confined in the same cell as Teddy. Upon seeing Bob in the adjacent cell, Teddy realizes that Bob is the hitman hunting him down. Next, Teddy attempts to bribe Bob, offering him double the amount his client is paying, in hopes of persuading him not to carry out the assassination. However, Bob, being a seasoned assassin, firmly declines the offer and remains determined to fulfill his mission of killing Teddy. Meanwhile, Bob's fellow inmate, also inebriated, appears to sober up and begins to display hostility towards Bob, taunting and bullying him. Unaware of Bob's true identity, the prisoner antagonizes him without realizing the danger he poses. At precisely noon, Bob swiftly incapacitates his cellmate with a lethal blow, causing him to vomit blood. Bob orchestrates this violent act to cause chaos and attract the attention of the police to his cell. Upon hearing the alarm blaring in the police station, Coleman, the station's supervisor, rushes in to assess the situation firsthand. He entered the cell to check on Bob's unconscious cellmate. However, as Coleman leaned over to assess the situation, he was unexpectedly ambushed from behind by Bob. Bob swiftly seized the gun tucked into Coleman's waist. He immediately aimed the gun at Teddy and fired several shots in an attempt to eliminate him. Fortunately, Teddy managed to evade the gunfire by jumping and hiding under the bed. Bob's assassination attempt on Teddy was thwarted by Valerie, who suddenly aimed her gun at him. Valerie warned Bob that she would shoot him in the head if he made any further attempts to attack. Bob surrendered, and his hands were restrained with handcuffs to the iron bars of the cell. Subsequently, Valerie assisted Coleman and the other inmate in Bob's cell in being escorted to the healthcare facility. Valerie hurried back to the cell to interrogate both Bob and Teddy. Initially, both of them remained silent. However, when Valerie threatened to place Teddy in the same cell as Bob, Teddy felt compelled to speak up. According to his confession, Teddy is a successful consultant whose clientele includes the wealthy, government officials, and mafia members. However, in carrying out his work, he engages in extensive fraud and embezzles valuable assets and money from his clients. As a result, he is now being targeted by numerous assassins. Valerie, with a keen gaze, immediately directed her attention to Bob, who was seated on the floor with one hand cuffed. Teddy then explained that prior to being incarcerated in his current location, he had voluntarily surrendered himself at a police station in Nevada. However, in the location where he is being held, there are numerous dishonest police officers who plan to take him to a remote area in the Nevada desert and execute him. Their motive is to seize the stolen money Teddy obtained from his client. Fortunately, just as he is about to face execution, the FBI arrives, sparking a violent confrontation between the corrupt Nevada police officers and the FBI agents. Amidst the chaos, Teddy seizes the opportunity to flee in a police car, marking the beginning of the film. Valerie takes the initiative to contact Detective Dina Shear, a fellow policewoman stationed at the Nevada border, in order to corroborate Teddy's account. She inquires whether there was indeed a shootout between the police and the FBI near the Nevada border, as Teddy had claimed. However, unbeknownst to Valerie, Detective Dina Shear is one of the corrupt officers collaborating with others in the pursuit of Teddy. When Valerie inquired about the shooting incident, Detective Dina Shear provided false information. Following this, Valerie tasked one of her fellow officers, Officer Kimball, with checking Bob's record in the police database. In addition to discovering Bob's profile as a hitman, Officer Kimball came across the profile of another assassin named Anthony displayed on the computer screen. Anthony is notorious for being a sadistic psychopath who shows no mercy when killing his targets. Simultaneously, a balloon delivery person entered the police station. Unfortunately, Officer Kimball failed to realize promptly that the individual delivering balloons was actually Anthony, the assassin whose profile appeared on the computer screen. Suddenly, without warning, Anthony pulled out a gun and shot Officer Kimball point blank, killing him instantly. He then unleashed gunfire at all the police officers who rushed into the room, catching them off guard. The officers were completely taken aback by the sudden violence and were ill-prepared to confront Anthony, who moved with astonishing speed as he seized a firearm and opened fire. Shortly afterward, Valerie entered the room and demanded that Anthony drop his weapon. Disregarding her warning, Anthony immediately aimed and fired a bullet at Valerie without hesitation. Reacting swiftly, Valerie leaped for cover into the nearby prison cell and shut the door behind her. Inside the cell, Valerie found herself locked in with Teddy and Bob. Fortunately, the prison door turned out to be bulletproof, preventing Anthony from breaking through despite his relentless barrage of bullets. Despite successfully taking refuge in the cell, Valerie suffered a serious stomach injury from the gunshot fired by Anthony earlier. She slumped on the floor, gazing at Bob and Teddy. Shortly after the gunfire erupted in the treatment room, Officer Hubbard, who was accompanying Coleman, unexpectedly drew his weapon and fired at both Coleman and the inmate. As it turns out, Officer Hubbard is part of the corrupt faction working alongside Anthony. They both received directives from the same mobster, who happens to be one of Teddy's clients. The Mafia is determined to eliminate Teddy for deceiving them. Thus, two assassins are vying to carry out Teddy's assassination, each working for different clients. Outside the prison cell, Officer Hubbard attempts to mislead Valerie by claiming that Anthony has left the police station. However, Valerie remains wary and skeptical of Officer Hubbard's information. Ultimately, Officer Hubbard grows agitated, raises his voice, and storms off, leaving Valerie alone. Continuing with their scheme, Anthony and Officer Hubbard devise a plan to breach the wall adjoining the prison cell where Teddy is held. They are observed studying the layout of the police station and commence their efforts to break through the wall. A loud noise emanates from outside the cell as Officer Hubbard successfully creates a hole in the wall. Meanwhile, inside the prison cell, Teddy attempts to persuade Valerie to release him by promising to procure the medication she requires for her stomach injury. Left with no alternative, Valerie eventually hands him the key to the cell door and also a firearm, allowing Teddy to confront Anthony before the wall is breached. Just as Teddy is about to leave the cell, Bob reveals that Anthony murdered his wife and children. Enraged by this revelation, Teddy storms out of the cell. In a separate area, Officer Hubbard was observed attempting to breach a wall, while Anthony sat nearby, observing. Suddenly, two police officers arrived for their shift. Reacting swiftly, Anthony lethally dispatched both of Officer Hubbard's colleagues without hesitation. Following the gunfire, Teddy emerged from another direction, armed with his own gun. Teddy relentlessly pursued Anthony and Officer Hubbard as they sought refuge in another room. Upon hearing the gunfire from elsewhere in the station, Valerie realized that Teddy had deceived her, prompting her to reluctantly release Bob from the cell. Shortly thereafter, Bob swiftly exited the room. Within the dimly lit confines of the police station, Officer Hubbard frantically attempted to evade Teddy's relentless pursuit. Unfortunately, Bob managed to apprehend him. Bob swiftly retrieved the gun from Officer Hubbard's waist and proceeded to shoot the officer multiple times in the leg. Using Officer Hubbard's body as bait, Bob lured Anthony into the room. Before long, Anthony arrived, believing he had hit his target. However, Bob emerged from behind, initiating a physical altercation between the two assassins. There was a noticeable age gap between them, with Bob appearing younger than the aging Anthony. As a result, Bob easily overpowered Anthony in hand-to-hand combat after discarding his firearm. The confrontation was intense, characterized by rapid movements. In a desperate attempt, Anthony seized a knife and aimed it at Bob's abdomen. However, Bob, displaying superior combat skills, anticipated the attack and countered with a decisive stab to Anthony's chest. Just as Bob was on the verge of finishing off Anthony, Teddy suddenly emerged, aiming a gunshot at him. Bob swiftly fled the scene, leaving behind the fatally wounded Anthony. Teddy then approached Anthony and delivered a final, fatal shot. Shortly after, Teddy began dousing the room with liquid fuel, intending to set it ablaze. Unsteadily, he made his way into the kitchen. While in the kitchen, Valerie confronted Teddy, informing him that she had already alerted the FBI to apprehend him. Upon hearing this, Teddy became emotional and hurled a jerry can of gasoline at Valerie. Fortunately, Valerie managed to evade the attack and fled upstairs, with Teddy in pursuit. Unfortunately for Teddy, Valerie, skilled with a firearm, was able to shoot him directly in the chest. The man tumbled onto the downstairs cupboard. However, as Valerie descended to assess Teddy's condition, suddenly her police partner, Detective Dina Shear, arrived and fired at her. It's evident that the detective is among the corrupt officers who had also targeted Teddy during the earlier FBI shootout at the Nevada border. The two policewomen confronted each other, with Valerie slumped against a table while Detective Dina Shear stood before her. With a rifle aimed at Valerie, Detective Dina was poised to shoot. Fortunately, Bob arrives just in time to rescue Valerie, swiftly shooting the female detective. Approaching Teddy, who was now immobile, Bob proceeds to fulfill his mission by firing 2 shots at the defenseless man. He then retrieves Teddy's confiscated belongings from the police and hastily departs. Meanwhile, as he drove away in a car, the FBI arrived at the police station. In the final scene of the movie, Bob is depicted casually driving a car along an empty road near the Nevada desert. During his journey, Bob promptly contacted his client, informing them that he had successfully carried out his assignment by eliminating Teddy and retrieving the stolen goods in the form of money and documents. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell if you want to watch more videos like this. Thank you for watching and see you again soon. Take care.